Hey everyone, this is Keith Baker. I am the host of the Dancing with Cancer podcast, where we talk about how to live an upbeat, joyful life in the middle of the cancer storm. Let's go. Hey everyone, this is Keith Baker with the Dancing with Cancer podcast, episode 55, How to Face Your Fears. Have you ever had one of those nightmares where it just seemed like it was so real and it was super intense, and it's like it kept escalating and escalating and escalating till you felt like you couldn't withstand anymore, and then all of a sudden you're startled awake? and it's like it takes you a minute to come back to reality. You're breathing heavy and your heart's just pounding in your chest because it seemed so real. I don't know. It seems like our subconscious sometimes knows exactly which buttons to push. That it knows our deepest, darkest fears. And somehow it thinks it would be a good idea to play that out on a 3D screen for us to live through over and over again. The reality is we all have fears. Every one of us have certain things that trigger us, or certain things that we worry about, that we're not sure the outcome on something, or we're not sure how it's going to play out, and that becomes a fear for us. Now, we really can't have a conversation about fear without recognizing that there is such thing as good fear. So in the sense of, for example, fire, we should have a fear of fire in the sense that we recognize that when it gets out of control, it can be extremely dangerous. Think the wildfires in California as an example. And yet we all use fire on a regular basis. And we understand, though, the nature of it. There's a certain amount of inherent danger there. Likewise, we should have a healthy fear of certain wild animals. My case specifically, my immune system is extremely weak because of the medications I take, and therefore I have to use good judgment concerning which activities I participate in and which activities I don't participate in. And ultimately, that's a healthy fear of what could happen if I don't use good judgment. So when we talk about fear, we need to understand that there's a certain measure of fear, or certain occasions when fear is a good thing. Scripture even tells us to fear the Lord, to fear God. And again, I think in that context, it's more of a healthy respect. But again, we understand that there are good fears and there are bad fears. There are rational fears and there are irrational fears. And so today we want to talk about how to handle or process our fears, how to deal with our fears. And we're going to do that by looking at two different characters in the Bible. We're going to start with David, and we're looking specifically at Psalm 34. But before we do that, I heard a story recently about a church service, and this church service was going along quite smoothly, and the worship team had just gotten done with an exciting time of praise and worship, and the pastor was getting ready to come up to the pulpit, and just then there was this loud boom, a huge cloud of smoke, and then there was this red figure appear with horns and a pitchfork, and he just kind of snarled, and the people, their eyes got big as saucers, and a panic swept across the congregation, and immediately they started jumping up and running out of the church. And it seemed like in that moment that Satan was enjoying the moment and just kind of snarling and and then he noticed over here to the left, there was one man sitting there with no fear. He just seemed like he was just sitting there. And this troubled Satan a lot. And so he looked at him and he kind of snarled at him. Do you know who I am? Yeah, I know who you are. Do you not fear me? The man just looked at him kind of calmly, nonchalantly, and just said, no, why should I be? I've been married to your sister for 35 years. Not what you thought I was going to say. You thought I was going to come out with some kind of spiritual point. Nah. Today, again, we want to look at two different characters from the Bible and how they responded to real situations. These are real people in real life situations and how they responded to fear. And so we're going to start by looking in Psalms chapter 34. Let's start with verses 1 through 3. Psalms 34. I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. I will glory in the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. So this is David. It's a psalm, and most of the psalms are songs. And when you read those first three verses, it is what I would call normal worship verses. If you think of worship courses you sing at church, or in this case, psalms, it sounds like a lot of other psalms, if I can be blunt. I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will be on my lips. I will glory in the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. Now, to truly understand the fullness of what he's saying here, we have to understand the situation that David was in this moment. So in this specific occasion, David is hiding in a cave, fearful for his life. So this isn't a case where he just went out and won a battle and he's celebrating with the troops and woo, we won. In actuality, it's the exact opposite situation. He is scared for his life. He's in a very dark place and he doesn't know what the future holds. He's hiding in a cave. But somehow, some way, in that moment, his mind goes here. And he says, I will extol the Lord at all times. Even when I'm in the midst of fear, even when I don't know the outcome, even though I'm hiding in a cave, fearful for my life. In that moment, I choose to extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. Do we understand the magnitude of this? That in his fearful moment, when he doesn't know how things are going to turn out, whether he's going to live or die or what's going to happen, in that moment, he chooses to celebrate. He says, I will glory in the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt the Lord. Let us lift up God in this moment. So one, I think, in my mind, when I picture this scene playing out, I can't imagine that he feels like praising God, right? I mean, in the moment, you don't feel like praising God because, like, he's in a very dark place, fearful for his life. But he chooses to do it anyway. In sports, there's a thing called muscle memory. And muscle memory is oftentimes athletes will do the exact same drill over and over and over and over again to create what they call muscle memory. And what this is when you do the same activity over and over and over and over and over again, so many times that your body does it almost like instinctively. It does it without you having to think about it. It just reacts. And the idea is the athlete wants to be able to, when he's out on the field, playing field, he doesn't want to have to think about things. He doesn't want to have to worry about all the rules and the best way to do this, the best way to do that. He wants his body to react instinctively through muscle memory. And so, for example, Jamar Chase is a receiver for the Cincinnati Bengals. And there have been many times I've read articles where the team will go out for practice, and then after practice is over, he will stay later and take another 120 throws from the jugs machine. Now, the jug machine is a machine that will throw a football on a spiral at about 40 miles an hour. That's moving. And the point is, he goes through the whole training that everybody else is going through. He goes through the team practice. But then after that, he takes the additional effort of taking an extra 120 throws from this jugs machine. And the idea is he wants to do it over and over and over again till he gets to the place where if it's a good throw or a bad throw, if it's a low throw or a high throw, he can catch that ball every single time and do it without thinking about it. It becomes a reaction, automatic reaction for him. His reflexes will take over, and they'll be quicker, they'll be faster, they'll be almost automatic because of his muscle memory. And I think David in this situation is practicing spiritual muscle memory. So what I mean by that is I think what he's telling us, or what we should learn from this and see happening here, is we shouldn't wait until we're in a bad situation and then say, okay, what should I do if I'm in a bad situation? Well, I remember in Psalms 34, it says that we should extol the Lord at all times and his praise will be on our lips. It'd be good if we did think that. But instead, I think what this really comes down to is we should practice this now when things are going good. In other words, every single day we should lift up God verbally with our tongues to each other, share with each other the good things that God is doing in our lives. We should make a practice of praising God, that his praise would be on our lips at all times. And if we practice it over and over and over and over and over again, it will become automatic for us. It will truly become spiritual muscle memory, where our knee-jerk reaction when something bad happens will automatically default to lifting God up and praising God. This story is about David hiding in a cave, scared for his life. And we're going to come back to it in just a minute, but we want to jump over to Philippians 4:4-7. Now, this passage is a lot more common passage. Many of you have heard before. And I just want to take a few minutes to look at it. But again, let's read it real quick. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Okay, so again, another one of those passages that you've probably heard a lot. And it's powerful when you start breaking it down, what he's saying there. But again, he starts out with, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Now, to me, he's emphasizing something to us. He's instructing us very clearly, rejoice in the Lord. What does rejoice mean? Think about that for a minute. The word means to be filled with joy or to celebrate, right? If you rejoice in something, you're celebrating in something. You're excited about it. Rejoice in the Lord always. And if you didn't get the point the first time, I will say it again. Rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. And then he goes on to lay it on. And this really hits home for many of us. Do not be anxious about anything. Okay, well, that's easier said than done. I mean, come on. Do not be anxious about anything. And we understand what the English language means when they say that. But then the question becomes, well, okay, how do we live that out? How do we make that happen in the real world? Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, how? By prayer and petition with thanksgiving. So thanksgiving is a huge part of that. Keep that, make a note of that. We'll come back to that. by prayer and petition, present your request to God. Here God is instructing us very plainly and very straightforwardly. I want you to rejoice. And I know it's not easy to do. It's not automatic necessarily today yet. The way you do it is by getting in the habit of bringing your requests to me. In other words, when there's something happens in your life that prevents you from rejoicing, that is harmful to you, or that is fearful for you, I'm directing you to bring those things to me. Give them to me, leave them with me, and therefore you can walk away and rejoice. You can focus on rejoicing because I'm going to take care of these things for you. Let me read that again. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again. Rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but instead of being anxious, in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. And this is the important part. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your mind in Christ Jesus. Okay, so this is Paul writing to the church in the Philippians. But Paul is in jail, right? He's in jail specifically because he's a believer, because he's a Christian. It's not fair and it's not right, but it is what it is. Now, I can imagine Keith Baker being in jail. Probably not the best situation. And I'm going to write a letter to a church across town or whatever. Maybe a church where I've ministered in the past. If I'm being honest, I'm not sure my first thought is, hey guys, rejoice. And again, I say rejoice. Do not be anxious about anything. It's all good. I'm in jail. But Paul does. And I think he does, again, not necessarily because he feels like rejoicing. He's in jail. He's in prison. He probably doesn't know the end result. Again, right? We know John the Baptist was beheaded. We know a lot more than he knew at that time. But anyways, the outcome was still undecided for Paul, to say the least. And the Romans weren't known for their grace and their gentleness. Let's put it that way. So Paul is in jail. Let me phrase it this way. Maybe this will help you understand better. The question I would want to ask is, do we rejoice because we are filled with joy? Or are we filled with joy because we chose to rejoice? You say, what's the difference? Well, which comes first? Does the rejoicing come first or does the joy come first? Now, I think typically most of us historically or in the past have probably lived based on, if the joy comes first, then I rejoice. But I would make the argument that that these scriptures both teach us a lesson that it doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to wait until we're filled with joy to rejoice, but just the opposite, in fact, is that we need to choose to rejoice, and then the joy will come as a result of our rejoicing, right? I've heard doctors say that if you choose to smile, even when you're not happy, that it sends, I think it was endorphins, I can't remember now, it creates a chemical reaction inside of you that will actually change your mood, right? So it's one of those things, do you smile because you're happy or are you happy because you smile? It's one of those kind of things. Do we rejoice because we're full of joy? Or are we full of joy because we chose to rejoice? And I would challenge you to get in the habit, get in the practice of celebrating, of rejoicing just because you're choosing to. Not necessarily because you feel like it. Matter of fact, I would take it one step farther and say specifically when you don't feel like rejoicing. Go out of your way to rejoice in that moment, and you may be surprised how quickly how you feel changes. Why is this important? One of the passages, one of my favorite passages, I know I've shared it multiple times in past podcasts, is the promise from God: I will keep you in perfect peace if you keep your mind stayed on me. I will keep you in perfect peace if you keep your mind stayed on me. Again, a lot of the conversations we have in this podcast is how to keep joy and peace in the midst of the cancer struggle. I believe when we choose to rejoice when we don't feel like it, what this does, we may not recognize it in the moment, but what this does is it takes our focus off of whatever the problem is, whatever the challenge is, whether it's unpaid bills, whether it's a health issue, whether it's my teenager and he's acting like a fool, whether it is fill in the blank, right? Whatever that thing is that's causing the stress, that's causing the way you feel to be negative, it takes your focus off of that thing and it puts your focus on God, right? When we choose, whether we're in a cave hiding for our life, when we choose to have His praise on our lips at all times, when we choose to rejoice in the Lord always, even when we don't feel like it, what we're doing without recognizing it, without realizing it, is we're changing our focus from whatever the problem is to our God. Now, let's jump back to that Psalm 34 again. And we're looking now at verses 4 through 6, 7, 8, I don't know. It's something like that. I sought the Lord and He answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to Him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. The poor man called and the Lord heard him. He saved him out of all of his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear Him. He delivers them. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in Him. So again, this is part of a song written by David when he's in a cave hiding for his life. He says, I sought the Lord. Now, I think at this point, he's shifted gears, right? He's choosing to worship God, but he's shifted gears to where now he's looking back on his own past. He's looking back on his own history. And he's saying, hey, I'm in a bad place right now, but I know what God has done for me in the past, right? It's not like a blank slate here. I've got a history, and my history is God has been there for me time and time and time again. I sought the Lord and He answered me. He delivered me from all of my, what's that? From my fears. Those who look to Him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. I think he's just saying that the reality is when a person learns to live and walk in the Spirit, there is a sense of joy and a radiance about that person. And this is important because I believe other people around you will see that radiance in you, even when you don't. They'll see that joy that's in you, and it becomes extremely attractive. There are a lot of people in our world right now who are overwhelmed with stress. They're overwhelmed with fears and anxiety. Young people, especially now, have more anxiety than they ever have had in the past. And they're looking for help. They're looking for a solution. They know there's a problem. They don't know how to fix the problem. But when they see people around them who are radiant, right? They're joyful. They're happy. They have peace. Whether they agree with them on a theological or a religious level or not, you're going to see a difference in that person that is attractive to them. And I think that's what David's talking about here. Those who look to him, to God, are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. The poor man called, and the Lord heard him. He saved him out of all of his troubles. Now, this poor man he's talking about is David himself. I believe he's, again, reflecting back on his own past. He's saying, hey, this poor man, me, I called out and the Lord heard me. Now, the New Living Testament for the same verse says, in my desperation, I prayed and the Lord heard me. We go to the next verse. It says, the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and he delivers them. What an amazing concept. That the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him. When you choose this alternate lifestyle, and being a believer is just that, it's an alternate lifestyle. You are choosing to live by different rules than the rest of the world. You're living in a God first, spouse second, family third. It's a whole different hierarchy. It's a different mindset than this world here. It changes everything. It changes the lens you see the world through. And this verse promises that the angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him. What an exciting thing, that thought, concept, that we are not alone in this battle. In all the craziness and all the fears that we have and all the things that are scary to us, we are not alone to fight those battles by ourselves. And then last, it jumps to taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Again, the New Living Testament translation, New Living Translation says, taste and see that the Lord is good. Oh, the joys of those who take refuge in him. Oh, the joys of those who take refuge in him. You see this pattern over and over and over again in Scripture that talks about joy and peace that comes to the person who commits their way to the God. When they put God first, when they say that I'm choosing to live my life differently, I'm putting God first. And when I come across these types of ideas and concepts, I'm going to implement them in my own life. I'm going to change the way I think. I'm going to change the way I live out my life based on these concepts. And in today's situation, that concept is I am choosing to rejoice always in every situation. Doesn't mean I'm thankful for everything that happens. I'm not glad that I'm in jail. I'm not glad that I'm in a cave, somebody pursuing me and I may or may not live. I'm not glad that I have cancer. But I will rejoice even though I have cancer. I will rejoice even though I'm in the cave, fearful for my life. I will rejoice even when I'm in prison, in a Roman prison of all prisons. I don't know if that makes sense to you. Again, it's the whole concept and idea in a nutshell is I don't rejoice because I'm full of joy. I'm full of joy because I chose to rejoice when I didn't feel like it. I chose to rejoice when I didn't feel like rejoicing, and it changed how I felt. Again, I love you guys. I'm so grateful that you guys stopped by. And I pray for everyone that listens to this podcast. I believe that God has better days for all of us. And again, it doesn't mean I won't have cancer, or I won't be in a cave hiding for my life, or that I won't be in prison. It doesn't mean that bad things don't happen. but it does mean that I can experience joy and peace in the midst of the struggle. Again, I love you guys. Please hit the like, the subscribe, and ring the bell. And we will see you next Monday. Adios.